Hey folks, it's Sam, and I'm here talking today about shame. What can you do about shame? And people shaming you, you being ashamed, you learning from shame and guilt, stress, and the pain of your mistakes. These are big Saturn, Capricorn, and Venus themes. Venus retrograde in Capricorn joins Saturn. And Pluto. Yeah, we got Pluto today. Look out. Sam's going crazy. He's going crazy. Pluto is here. By the way, so is Mickey and Goofy. We got all three, but we'll save that. But I'm going to be talking about this. It's very important. This, especially this beginning section of this retrograde Venus cycle, is this quality of shame and facing our shame, and noticing how we deal with feeling shamed, being ashamed, learning from things that we should be ashamed of, the mistakes that we make. And so we're going to talk about that in this context. And I have some real useful thoughts, especially about how to recognize your shame, and how to know whether or not you're sort of blind around the subject, because we have a lot of blind spots here because it's very Saturn in nature. Now, I just put in the chat this link to the 2022 personal forecasts. Many of you have gotten the free 2022 forecast that I've done, that you've seen me do, the 2022 Vedic astrology, which is this free forecast of these 10 important shifts that you must know. So if you have gotten that, or even if you haven't, but you want to know how those 10 shifts will affect each of the signs, then you can go to that link. You see this, it scrolling at the bottom. Your 2022vedicastrology.com takes you to this page, and you can get the video. I'm sorry, you can get literally a 15-minute video of me explaining these 10 most important shifts here for all 12 signs, of course, including yours. And you can also get all 12 of the forecasts for less than $100. So for less than what it would cost you to get half of them, you can get all of them. So these are very popular. Again, 2022 has a lot of important shifts ahead. We have the nodes changing signs, very much, Aries centric, with Rahu moving into Aries. And then later we have Mars and Rahu very close, which could bring a lot of this kind of potential blow-ups and war and very difficult, personal struggles if we're not on board with it and we don't know how to deal with these things. So a lot of these personal issues that I'm going to be talking about today, even these issues that have to do with Venus and starting her retrograde cycle now, one of the first things that I talk about in the 2022 forecast is Venus turning direct in Sagittarius, which happens at the end of January. So I'm picking up this cycle that we're talking about now into next year. That's one of the first big shifts that I mention here. So very relevant for you, and especially for your 2022 forecast. These are finished now. So as soon as you order this, you'll have it sent to you like immediately. It'll be sent to your inbox. You'll get to watch the 15-minute video. So check that out. So, okay, we're here now, and we're talking about this Venus retrograde in Capricorn. It's with Saturn. And as you see, Pluto is also there. Mickey, Goofy, and Pluto. I'm just teasing. The outer planets are fine. I don't generally use them, but the reason I decided to bring up Pluto in this case is because it's right on it's less than 1 degree from where Venus turned retrograde. So if you use that Pluto symbol and use it as like a kind of symbol of the underworld and things like that, it has a relevance to this Venus retrograde, because Venus disappears and you could even say mythologically, goes into the underworld, then emerges on the other side. So I find that symbol to be, quite relevant if you choose to use it. I could do the forecast without it, but I thought I would include it here because of its proximity here, especially to the exact point where Venus turns retrograde. And also because of these themes of shame. Now, let's be clear, shame is a Saturn principle, and especially Capricorn. Capricorn and Saturn are basically are literally the planets of shame, of course, especially Saturn. But what is it? What are we talking about when we talk about shame? We're talking about, I have the definitions here, and I want to get into them literally because there are a couple different ways that shame is used. It's used as a noun and a verb. And the usage is really important because shame as a noun is actually a very positive trait. You're like saying, Sam, what's so positive about shame? Well, because most of the lessons that you've learned, we learn from our mistakes by feeling shame. We're ashamed of doing bad things to people. Let's just make it simple, okay? And when we look at shame as a noun, it looks like this: a painful emotion caused by consciousness of guilt, shortcoming, or impropriety. So you do something wrong to someone and it wears on you. You lie to someone, or you cheat on them, you abuse them, in one way or another, hitting them or maybe psychologically abusing them or mistreating them, it leaves shame. Now, in fact, one of the definitions of someone who is, let's say, like a psychopath, classical psychopath, is they don't feel shame. They have no shame. It leaves no residual trace. It's like they're almost, that thing isn't alive in them. And it also is the susceptibility to such emotion, right? Like, have you no shame? Have you no capacity to feel guilty? Or don't you understand? Like, have you no capacity? Like, when we see that someone has no capacity to be ashamed of doing something, it's shocking to us. It's like, how can you do that and not feel ashamed? How does your ego reconcile, like, on a spiritual level? How do you reconcile that you could act like that and feel no shame about it? Like, it almost feels like someone is inhuman if they don't have any shame, if they're not ashamed of obvious bad conduct. And also, but it can also be a condition of humiliating disgrace or disrepute. Like, it's along the same lines, but a different usage. The shame of being arrested, right? It's the same kind of thing. Or something that brings censure or reproach. It's a shame you can't go. It's a little more, that's a little different, but also something to be regretted, right? But these are more amorphous. But the main feeling is this one here. This is the one we're going to be talking about the most, is these two here: the shame of being arrested, have you no shame. And it's a self-corrective. It's how Saturn actually corrects us and puts us on track, because we feel ashamed, and it's the weight of Saturn showing us our limitations and making us feel ashamed with maybe how we've treated someone, usually, or it's usually in relation to another person. And that's how we're going to talk about it here, because it's Saturn, Venus. But now as a verb, it's very different. Again, it can be, but this is where it's often talked about, and I see it talked about a lot in this regard, from the point of view of a victim. Like, oh, I've been shamed. You're shaming me. Don't allow yourself to be shamed. And this is what I'm going to talk about as well: how to deal with, and what's really going on when we're in this kind of conundrum. So the definition of shame is like to be shamed, to bring shame to the family name, like you shamed the family name. To put to shame, to cause to feel shame, or to force to cause to feel guilty, like shamed into confessing. And this is the kind of thing that we often talk about when we're trying to, again, if we feel like we're being victimized by someone who is, you're just shaming me, you're just trying to shame me and make me feel bad. And again, we've all felt this as well. The way this often shows up is someone again, blaming is also blaming someone is also a quality of shaming them. Blaming and shaming are very synonymous, which I'll get into in a minute. But first, I want to get the definitions here. And then we have the synonyms for that. Synonyms, there's also antonyms, which we don't need to get into. But the synonyms, or the nouns that are similar, are also important to look at. So we have, contriteness, guilt, penance, regret, remorse. Again, these are very important. Regret is a synonym for shame. I feel ashamed. I regret what I did. I feel remorse about what I did. I feel shame. I feel ashamed of it. I have shame for that. I have remorse for that thing. Guilt. I feel guilty. I was guilty of that, and I feel guilt. And again, feeling guilt is how we stop doing the same monstrous thing. People who have no guilt, have no shame, never feel remorse, are people that wind up being like pathological abusers, sadistic, pathological abusers. And again, sadistic means they enjoy hurting others. They enjoy it. They don't have any guilt, don't have any shame. And we've seen people like this, and we've seen people treat others like this, and we've probably been treated this way before. And once we see that someone is, again, this is a very charged word, sadistic, but it does have a meaning. It's someone who enjoys making others suffer. And the only way you could enjoy making someone suffer is if this guilt, regret, remorse gene or function is not operating very well. Because if it was, knowing that you're intentionally bringing pain to someone else would make you feel guilt, and that guilt would stop you because you would feel bad. Because you would feel bad knowing that you're deliberately trying to punish another person. The only way you could do that is if this whole quality of being shamed, or feeling shame and regret and remorse and guilt and contrition, was not very powerful in you. If that is not so powerful, then the way you might use Saturn energy, and the way it might feel very alive in you, is by punishing someone. Like, aha, you punished me, you did this to me, no, I'll do it to you. You punished me, again, even if someone didn't punish them, but the feeling is, okay, you did this to punish me and to do this, well, I'm going to do it to you now. And there's a justification for it or something like that. So in that example, the shame that we feel that corrects us from doing those things is not working very well. So synonyms for the verb, again, when you're shaming someone, would be to chasten, or to debase, or to degrade, or to demean, discredit, disgrace, dishonor. That's to shame someone. Like, I shamed you into seeing the truth. I had to shame you to show it to you, or whatever it might be. Or, again, these are very tricky things, because I'm going to tease it out a little bit more later, but just to kind of, often if someone doesn't feel this guilt or remorse or contrition, they will get into this part, and they will shame you, and they will want to demean and discredit and dishonor and disgrace you because they think you did something to them. So again, I wanted to talk about the two aspects of this kind of in general first, so that we can see what's exactly going on. So there are two different ways. And by the way, it's not always abusive. The verb part of it either isn't always, it's not necessarily like it's abusive. Like shaming someone, naming and shaming and blaming, is, again, even just bringing something up. When you call something out that isn't correct, isn't right, and it winds up shaming the person into seeing what they've done and make them feel, guilty or regret what they did. It's not necessarily like someone is doing that because they're trying to hurt the other person. Maybe they want you to see, for example, like parents with kids. We can look at all of these things are just natural functions. None of them are necessarily abusive or dark or coercive or sadistic or anything like that. But they also run very close to those areas of life. But again, a parent very, gently instructing a child understands that, okay, I have to shame them a little bit into seeing what they did. You shouldn't pick on your little brother. Don't you see how you hurt him? You're shaming the child so that they see it. And maybe they don't see it yet, right? They don't see that. They don't feel guilt yet. It's a sophisticated emotion. It's not obvious, right? It's a nuanced emotion that we have to, that is part of, developing a conscience. Like it says here, it's a very subtle thing, painful emotion caused by a consciousness of guilt, shortcoming, or impropriety. So we already have an aversion to feeling painful emotions. You see, and shame is a painful emotion that we don't want to feel. It's much more easy to feel anger than to feel shame. To feel angry at what we think was done to us rather than feel ashamed of what we did as adults, just to see it like that. If you take it on a different level, which is where I'm kind of going with this. Just keep that in your mind. It's much more easier to feel angry because you think something was done to you than to feel ashamed of maybe what you did or your part in it. And then once that happens, it's very easy to then shame the other person for the thing they did to you that victimized you. And again, then the shame can get projected in this whole thing, when underneath it all, there might just be a lack of shame on the part of you or the person that is making the thing not go well. And I'm going to show you and give you a simple way to understand whether or not you can be shamed or not. Like how to really understand, because it can be very confusing, but I'm going to make it simple for you in a minute. Very easy to be able to tell if you're feeling shamed or someone can shame you. Then it shows up in a very crystal clear way, which I'm going to explain in a minute. That's why this video is about what can you do about shame. I'm not just making stuff up. I'm going to explain what I think is the real thing going on here. But so first of all, again, the first thing that I want to do here is to diffuse the drama around this whole thing of shame. Like everything, it has a dharmic purpose. Again, it's one of the very important qualities of Saturn, actually. And I'm doing an upcoming course on the kind of like essence of the planets. And one of the ways the planets all have a kind of, in some ways, a kind of cruel, all of the planets, that includes Venus, Jupiter, the moon, Mercury, even the gentle planets have a cruel quality to them that teaches us a destructive nature that's trying to destroy some part of what we think we're doing. And one of the ways Saturn does it is through shame and guilt and pressure. This is the emotional pressure of Saturn feels like guilt and shame. And that's what teaches us. That's what humbles us. We don't just get humbled by, it's not just humbled is just a kind of abstraction. The way humbled feels to us often is we feel ashamed of ourselves. There's nothing more humbling than that. And if we don't want to feel that, because it's hard to feel that, it's easier to get angry than to feel shame and humbled. It's not an easy emotion. So we can get very twisted up around this and not even understand how the power of Saturn often brings this consciousness of guilt, of our mistakes. Our mistakes feel this way to us. And this is how Saturn also creates a lot of aversions, because we're afraid of feeling that again. We don't want to feel that guilt and shame and the pain of our mistakes. This is how I explain it. So when Saturn influences planets in a natal chart, this is the awareness that it brings. It brings an awareness of limitations, an awareness of the mistakes that we make, and the guilt and shame and that gets revealed as we make these mistakes. I mean, it's not just guilt and shame, but that's definitely a part of it. And how that's a part of the corrective matrix into which Saturn works. Because then, again, especially externally, we realize, okay, I'm not as smart as I think. And I went into this thing with a lot of arrogance and a lot of, again, you can look at the exalted and the debilitated placements of planets to see this. Saturn is debilitated in Aries, where we have a lot of, we're fired up. I'm right. I'm charging in there and I'm ready to battle over things and blah, blah. And again, there's a lot of cruelty in that, in going into things like that. And it's going to humble us. And again, humbling ourselves before other people as a matter of Saturn's power is shown by Saturn being exalted in Libra, where we are humbled before other people. And we're like, things like apologies. And again, the consciousness of guilt that I did something to you. I acted less virtuous than I should have. I allowed my anger or frustration or fear or stress to be insulting to you in a way that didn't honor and respect you the way you should be. And I'm extremely sorry for that. And really make a commitment to try to not do it again and really try and have it be a real thing that we try to correct. This is the virtue of Saturn, the power of Saturn. And it's that guilt and that shame that really, that creates an aversion to feeling that way again. Again, I always bring things also back to the idea that no matter what you think you're doing for someone else, you're always doing it for yourself. Again, and it's not wrong or bad, but it's just an awareness that everything you're going to experience, you're going to experience through your own consciousness. And again, the consciousness of guilt and not wanting, and you not wanting to experience that difficult emotion again, is really the kind of connective tissue that makes you not keep doing the same things because you don't want to keep feeling that way. And again, this is also back to the exaltation of Saturn in Libra, because those agreements and those things like that, we learn to be more patient. We learn to be more careful because we also don't want to feel that way again. It all comes back to us. Gayatri says, hi, Sam. Positive quality of shame is it cracks the ego where we can try to always be in the right versus taking responsibility for our part in the equation. Exactly, Gayatri. Gayatri is one of my longtime students. She's graduated a couple levels from my certification course. And again, this whole thing, positive quality of shame, is it cracks the ego where we can try to always be in the right. Again, this is a kind of, this is an embodiment of that, debilitated placement. By the way, it doesn't mean just if people have the planet there, or someone could have the planet there and other things that support it and whatnot. It's just, we can understand the exalted and the debilitated placements as an archetype as much as anything. And that's really the easiest way to understand it, is the highest and the lowest qualities. And yes, the lowest quality of Saturn is when we think we're right and we're going to act from this place of fear. And instead of, like I said here, as it says in the description, instead of this, of being able to feel this painful emotion caused by the consciousness of guilt, shortcoming, or impropriety, instead of sitting with that and being able to feel that, it's much easier to get angry than to sit there and willingly feel a painful emotion of consciousness and guilt, because we don't want to feel that anyway. So again, a sort of embodiment of that would be Aries, which is like, I'm not. No, I'm right. I'm always in the right. Whereas, as she said, versus taking responsibility for our part in the equation. The equation is like Libra. Like, yes, I participated in this, and I could have done better. So when I see a lot of the when I see shame talked about a lot, it's often, again, because we tend to want to, it's in some ways we really have a kind of victimization culture going on right now. Let me take a quick drink. I don't mean to be negative here, but just that even with a lot of the Venus retrograde forecasts and stuff that I've seen, it's all about, now's the time to leave situations where you're not being respected and you're being mistreated and you're this and that. Again, if you look at my report on this, I include that, like, yes, that's part of it. But then we have to look deeper. Why are we in a situation where we're letting ourselves be mistreated? And what about how we're treating? It's really a time for us to evaluate ourselves, not just look outward at what people are doing to us and say, that's it, I'm not going to be your doormat anymore. Look, if we're allowing that to happen, then again, it's still the most important thing is to look at why we're allowing that to happen in the first place. And that's going to be because we're making agreements that we're not really, totally behind. And then we're feeling like a victim, like people are doing stuff to us and victimizing us. Again, yeah, we should get out of that, but we should mainly understand why we let it happen in the first place. And the same thing I see with this whole shame, conversation. Yeah, people shaming us, that's the whole thing. Like, now is the time to look at those who are shaming you and those who are trying to shame you and all this. Look, you want to understand something. No one can shame you unless you've done something that is shameful that you have not accounted for. Think about this and know it's just very simple. Like, if someone tried to shame you for something that you didn't do, it wouldn't work. Again, it's actually just very simple. And I'll just give you an example, and I'll make the examples kind of outlandish first and then make it more palatable. But what if someone tried to blame? And again, shame often follows blame. And like, someone blames you for something to try to shame you, to make you ashamed of it so that you'll, feel bad about it, or, what have you. Again, in the highest sense, we just use the example of maybe like parents who are trying to teach their children. And part of the teaching, the coercion method, is to make them feel that you have to bring a little shame into some of the things they've done. And it's not because you're trying to abuse them. It's because that's part of the learning process of especially big things, is like, look, you shouldn't do that. Look at how your words made your little sister feel. Now, see, you're older than your little sister, so you're more mature than her. So, maybe you get mad at me as your father and yell, and it doesn't hurt my feelings. But look at how it hurts your little sister's feelings, because she doesn't understand. So you have to understand this. Now, again, you could talk to like a child like that. Let's say like a 8-year-old child who is yelling at his 3-year-old sister, and you're using shame. It's guilt and shame, but that's the only way that you learn. But it's also true, right? And the child's going to feel ashamed. He's going to feel shame, but that shame is going to also make him sensitive now to his little sister, sensitive to this thing that he didn't understand, and more mature. Again, these are all Saturn keywords, big Saturn keywords, right? And hopefully it's done in a way with parents where it's not, where you're not shaming the child, really shaming them. Like, a worse way to do that would be then to yell at them like, what's wrong with you? Are you stupid? Yelling at your sister like that? You're a blah, blah. And then you really tear into the 8-year-old. Now it's a different level. Now they have done something wrong and you're shaming them. And it's a whole other, now it's a very bad experience. And if people have grown up with that kind of thing, given to them, then they're going to have a real sensitivity to later on things that feel like I just mentioned, like this, consciousness of guilt and whatnot, it could really trigger all of that other stuff where their relationship with, feeling shame and learning from it in a positive way was very painful. So they might really reject it. This is why they may have a very hard time with this kind of thing, right? So again, just to go back to the examples, let's use a few examples. So let's say someone accused you of something I'm just going to use a ridiculous thing just to give you an example. Someone tried to shame you for, killing JFK. Well, it's ridiculous, right? But again, I want you to see though, that's ridiculous because obviously you didn't do it. So you're not going to feel any guilt or any shame. Well, what if they tried to guilt or shame you for something like, something almost equally outlandish? Like, let's say they tried to shame you for, causing a riot in your neighborhood or something. And they put together a bunch of things that were kind of crazy and a little conspiratorial. Again, it would be outlandish. But let's say it was something more close to home where, again, maybe it's someone that you know really well and they're just kind of paranoid about something, like one of your friends, and they project something really negative onto you and they try to blame you for it and they try to guilt you and shame you for it. Again, this is another kind of shaming. And you didn't do it, and they're just off their rocker here. Like, no. This person is just like, whoa, way overboard. Again, it's not possible for them to shame you for that. You're not going to feel ashamed. There's no shame there because you didn't do it. Now, again, all of it feels painful to interact with people that do this. It feels painful to get that. All of it does, even though none of it is going to make you feel ashamed, and none of the blame they're throwing at you is going to stick because it's not true. But now talk about something more close to home. Again, someone that you are involved with, someone where you are going back and forth, and someone where you are going back and forth, and you're involved with all kinds of personal involvement with them. And again, like a relationship and, that kind of thing. And now you've had a disagreement and there's things that you said, there's things that they said, and they say something and they're sort of blaming you for something. And again, they're trying to shame you for it. Again, shame and blame go very close together. But you're not sure if you're guilty or not. Like, what do you do? Like, how do you get clear about those things? And what do you do about it? What do you do to get free of shame? What do you do to get free of shame? And the thing that I insist on that's helped me in my life, because I like, one of the things with me is I'm kind of shameless in some ways. And it's not because I'm blameless for anything, but if I do something, one of the things I'll do, and I say this all the time, is apologize. Apologize. I check in with what has happened. And I know anything that I think I've gone too far on anything. And there are times, especially like in, let's say, romantic relationship or deep personal friendship or something where there's a lot of hooks going on and you have a lot going on with someone, where it's more confusing, or where I get upset and angry and very critical or something like that. I've apologized for all of that. And if I would need to apologize more, the person would tell me, if the person was able to have a regular communication about it, and they said, this is still bothering me, or you did this, and they still needed me to hear more of what I did, I would apologize. You apologize, and you sincerely, you don't apologize to shut them up. You don't apologize to say, oh yeah, sorry, but you did this. It's not an apology. But you sit with it and you actually go through this process. You go through the painful emotion caused by the consciousness of guilt, shortcoming, or impropriety. You feel it, and you really feel it, and you really express that, you know what? You deserved better, and I was wrong. And I'm very sorry that my shortcomings and my ego and my anger and my frustration caused me to treat you that way. And you're right. It was terrible, and I'm sorry. And I'll try my best to not do that anymore. And you deserve better than that, or whatever it is. Again, now it depends on the severity of it. But again, also, I will say that I also know that I'm not, punching people and doing other kinds of things to screw people's lives up. So again, but if those kinds of things, and if it were that kind of thing, again, you have to do what you can to make it right. And this is the power of Saturn, to release the past. You don't release the past. You don't work through it, work through your guilt, work through it all without actually doing the work. And the work of it, the work of Saturn, is this process. One of the biggest things is to be humbled. What do you think being humbled looks like? It's not just that you fail and then you feel bad and you get into some emotional depression over it. That's not the empowered quality of Saturn. Saturn isn't humbling you to punish you because you're a bad person. It's showing you your mistakes and then saying your way to correct it is to do, like I've just been explaining with the exalted Saturn is in Libra, to apologize, to reach out to the person and be humbled in front of someone. This is what humbled is. It's not just you're humbled so you retreat into your lonely world of sadness and depression. That's also just a narcissistic response. No, you're humbled, and the mistakes you've made are going to be will wear on you as guilt and shame and all these negative emotions until you make amends with it. And the way you make amends with it is to apologize, is to be clear, is to work it out on that level with the people or with whatever the situation is. If not, then other people, then you're going to feel like others are shaming you just when they're telling you the truth. So this is the part of it that gets tricky. Is many people will feel like they're being shamed. Oh, you're trying to shame me. You're trying to shame me. Why is it that just telling you what you did or what happened, it's not trying to shame you. It's just telling you the other person's perspective. Again, if it is actually shaming you, it's because you've done something you're ashamed of. Otherwise, like I just explained, there would be no possibility of being shamed. Again, let someone try to shame you for something you didn't do. It doesn't work. You don't feel ashamed if you didn't do something that you are ashamed of. Now, again, it can be confusing, but introspect about things, even introspect about things that you've been ashamed of, and see if you've resolved them. Again, there's some things that you can't apologize for. There are things I did, especially, I'll tell you some of the things. I'm not going to tell you the things because it doesn't really matter, but I remember things I did when I was a kid. I can't go back and change them. But honestly, when I was a kid, when I was in elementary school, there was a few years where, and it's hard for me to even say that. I feel guilty about it now, and it's 50 years ago, and I feel guilty. But I was a bully. I bullied a couple kids. And I tell you right now, I get choked up thinking about it now. I feel guilty about it. I still feel guilty about it. I'm remembering a couple things I did to a couple kids. And you know what happened is I felt guilty about it. back then. And then I stopped it. And then what I wound up doing was defending kids against bullies. So for about 2 years in elementary school, I was a bully. I bullied some kids. That was I think it was second and third grade. And I remember it really well. I remember what I did. And I honestly, one thing that I did, I can't even tell you now because I'm so ashamed of it. It wasn't just an innocent pushing some kid around. And this is the thing that taught me what I was doing. I can't even say it because I'm so ashamed of what I did. And after that, because this one kid was bullied, after that, I apologized to him. I apologized to him in private because I was so ashamed. I actually bullied him and told a lie about him to everybody and had everybody mad at him. After I did the thing, I said he did it. Then I beat him up for doing the thing that I did. I can't tell you how it was awful. Now, I was 8 years old, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. And I apologized to him in private because I was too ashamed. But then I was like his defender. Like I defended him. And I defended everybody against bullies after that. I was kind of like the bully defender for the rest of my years in elementary school. I was like the bully defender. But, you know, the thing I'm saying here is that, and the reason I wanted to really talk about this is that understand this about shame and being shamed. And it's not like anyone wants anyone to be ashamed of themselves. The last thing I want, and people who I have seen respond, again, it's very painful for me to have people respond. It's been very hard in relationships that I've had where people who have this aversion, like the aversion I talked about, where they were shamed a lot as a child, if you just try to, again, sort of hold them to account, or you just try to work things out with them and you say, well, wait a minute, but you did this, people will often, they'll project that you're trying to shame them, and then they'll defend themselves against this, and they will project, again, that you're shaming them, and they will try to shame you for shaming them. Stop shaming me. You're trying to shame me. And they will accuse you and blame you for shaming them when you're not even trying to shame them. So again, what they're also doing is trying to shame you for just wanting to talk about it. So again, it can be such a blind sort of thing. When you're like, I'm not trying to shame you. Can you just understand that I don't want to be accused of this, or I don't want to have this happen? Like, can you just understand that you're doing this thing, you're, accusing me of something, or you're doing this kind of thing, and me calling you on it or saying, I don't want that, isn't trying to shame you. It is trying to get you to say, okay, I get it. So, it is a very complex and subtle and difficult emotion. And the thing that hopefully maybe you could get that might be helpful out of this is that you can't be shamed for something that you haven't done, for something that you're not guilty of. And if someone tries to shame you and you actually feel the shame of it, look at where you haven't apologized, where you're actually guilty and you haven't made it right with that person, and notice how you project it out. If you feel like you're always being shamed, notice where you are shaming others. And again, this also falls very much in line with these negative qualities of Saturn, which has to do with punishment and feeling like you deserve it. You did this to me. Now I get to punish you. You need to take your punishment. Again, all of these are all kind of negative qualities of Saturn. And so something that is potentially, and it's very painful that, Saturn shows this pain of separation from spirit. It's painful. It's hard. We're here and we feel this separation from spirit. And Saturn is where we feel the heaviness of that. And it's painful and it feels isolating. And it's again, humbling feels like that. Humbling is when you're like I remember humbling myself in front of this kid. I'm not going to say his name, but I still remember his name. I still remember the whole thing really well. And that was a long time ago. And I definitely remember how it feels. That's what humbling is. Humbling isn't like, oh, I was humbled and I failed. Yeah, but that's not necessarily something that you're going to grow through. You go all the way through the experience. You don't stop the experience when it feels so uncomfortable that now you're just going to retreat and run away from it. Right? Because the planets are going to bring their juice. Saturn is going to bring the juice. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to feel bad. And, by the way, I forgive myself for doing that. I know exactly why I did that. I was repeating my patterns because I was getting beat up and hit and punished, and all the stuff I did to that kid was happening to me. Well, I didn't have any power. I was getting hit and all this kind of stuff. So here's a kid I can do that to. Okay. And I did it. I was just acting out. I was unconscious. This is why boys who wind up getting beaten and hit often wind up doing the same thing. But I had a conscience. The conscience kicked in, thank God, when I was even young. It's the only time I did it. And by the way, the kid was my best friend. Again, it's very twisted. Very twisted. I mean, I love this kid. He was my best friend. It's terrible. It's just terrible. Terrible how confused and screwed up we are, right? And so, but here's what happens is you have to go all the way through it. You don't just say, oh, now I'm feeling it and now's the time to feel, and don't let anyone shame you and get all fired up and instead of if that's going on, and for example, shame is a big part of the thing. By the way, it's not going to be for me because I'm not ashamed of anything. I'm not. I mean, I can go and talk about these things, but I mean, I feel very clean about things. And again, anyone who, if you're mad at me about something and you want to do, and I've done something and you want to tell me, go ahead and I'll talk to you about it. I don't care who it is. I'm open. I really am, no matter who it is. I'm sorry for any time that I've ever hurt people, and I know I've done it plenty of times. And I'm not afraid to hear it and say, you know what, you're right. I'm sorry. You deserve better than that. And trying to work through the difficult relations with, romantic partners or friends or business partners or whoever it is. I've always done my best, and I'm definitely not perfect and make a lot of mistakes. And I'm always sorry for the mistakes that I make. And I'll say it and go through it. And regardless of what it feels like, it's not going to feel good. If we're afraid to be humbled, and if we're afraid to go all the way through it, and if you have these pockets where you have done things where you're wrong, and you have this conscience of guilt there and shame because you're feeling the shame. Again, just like anything else, no one else can shame you. No one can create shame in you. They can't create it in you. They could say something, but if the shame doesn't exist in you for something you're ashamed of, it won't work. Again, let me try to shame you for something like the death of JFK. It ain't going to work. But if I try to shame you for something that maybe you did, but maybe you're not sure, but maybe it's right and maybe not. Again, notice how much it really has a hook in there. If there's some of it where you do feel ashamed of it, then there's probably something in there that's unresolved, and the way through it and the way to work through it, if it's at all possible, maybe you can't apologize to the person because maybe the relationship doesn't facilitate that or whatever it might be. But that's, to me, the simplest way, particularly with anything that's active and hot and current, which is a lot of what goes on. active and hot and current, then usually there's a way to be able to communicate. I usually keep communication channels open. I'm usually not the one to break them off ultimately. I need breaks at times, especially if it's things like there's like, you know, when you're in a romantic relationship or something and you just need to get away. But ultimately, I'm open to any of the people I've been involved with to have a good friendship or whatever. That's not always mutual. And that's, if that's what they want to do, then okay. I'll respect that too. But that's not my choice, nor is it nor do I, in any of those situations, have anything that I'm ashamed of. So if someone would try to shame me for any of that, it wouldn't work, because I already know I've made amends. And if I haven't, and the person wanted to say it or talk about it, I would be totally there to hear it and apologize for what I had done, and if it's still sitting with them or whatever it might be. So I'm just offering this in this way in case if there are things that you are, if you're processing some of this, because again, these are also very big themes with Capricorn, with Saturn, with Venus retrograde again in Capricorn. There's a lot of these themes coming together. It's this gravitas, it's this weight of time, this pressure of time, these consequences of your actions and compromises and whatnot. And the fact that we got Saturn and Venus both very close here as well. You know, again, Venus is the sign that really or the planet that really exalts Saturn. So there's a great possibility of you maybe working through some of this, some of these aversions, if some of that is going on in your life. So a few people have some comments. Deb Norms, forgive yourself. Do you think it's a type of shame running in the background that dictates the personality later? No, it's very, you know, no, Deb, I'm cool. I don't subscribe to the idea that every single thing. I'm glad that those connections to my history are alive in me. It's still alive in me, you know, and it's, believe me, I don't walk around thinking all day about what I did back then. If anything, I notice how I learned from it and I'm thankful that I learned it, because I could have just unconsciously repeated the pattern, which is what I was programmed to do. But I think it's healthy to carry around some of those things. I'm not burdened by it. Like I just said, I'm not burdened by any of the things that I've done, but I remember those things that I've been deeply ashamed of in my life. I still remember them, and I remember how they feel. Again, I'm not burdened by it. Otherwise, I would be sort of crippled by it. But yeah, I think we should remember these things as part of our conscious memory. I'm glad that I have that recall and that I can that I have access to that, and it's still very real. You know, my feelings and my past and my feelings about things are very close to the surface in that context. Gayatri said, thank you for sharing personal uncomfortable moment in your life that illuminates this concept. We appreciate your emotional courage. You're welcome, Gayatri. No problem. Someone says, same. It was my best friend too. Yep, it broke me, but I'm healing through it to trigger my spiritual awakening in a way that I felt was predestined. So you're talking about, yeah, the person that I bullied when I was a kid. Again, I was 8 years old. It was second and third grade. It was second grade, 7 years old, 7 to 8 years old. He was my best friend, you know, and again, you know, boys are always in some sort of dominant thing. You know, I played tennis with one of my buddies today. You know, boys are competitive, and we're all doing that kind of stuff. And when you're young, you know, young boys, we're like little animals, you know, where there's a hierarchy and you're fighting and it's all this kind of stuff. So, you know, but so it's definitely one of those things where you kind of test yourself, you know, with siblings and whatnot. So yeah, it's a very tricky thing. We're all here learning, and as they say, walking each other home, right? So the real Kato Gaming said very useful. Well, good. I'm glad it was useful. So anyway, this is kind of a last minute thing. I didn't really plan on this. I wanted to talk about it because it's a very important concept, and I want people to, and I think it might be useful to think about this especially this idea that if you can be shamed, for example, and shame is something that's lording over you and you carry around a lot of shame, frankly, I think the real antidote for a lot of shame is a lot of forgiveness of others and apologizing to the ones that you haven't, because this is where Saturn gets hung up. This is where being humble, this is what it looks like. And this is what Saturn is trying to do. And again, no one can shame you for something you're not ashamed of. And to just feel like you're the victim of people shaming you, it doesn't make sense, because again, no one can shame you for something you didn't do. Again, that doesn't mean it's easy if someone tries to. If someone starts blaming you and trying to shame you for something, it might feel very painful, but you're not going to be ashamed based on the thing that they're saying. You might feel sad that they're saying that, which I definitely feel that kind of stuff for sure, but I don't feel guilty about it, or that the shaming part of it doesn't work. It just makes me be like, just confused, like, what are you doing? So as these things come up, and again, because the retrograde planets are very subtle, if these things are coming up for you, maybe listen, maybe introspect a little bit about what I said and think about these definitions of shame, at least I think are very important. And again, the one definition of shame is that healthy corrective process. Again, this is the other reason I want to talk about it, because it's not just some terrible thing that happens to us. Some of the biggest lessons we learn in life come through things like shame. And again, we all learned valuable lessons, and hopefully when they were taught to us when we were younger, we weren't shamed harshly, but we learned these more subtle things. Again, I just relayed to you. I remember one of the, I don't know how much my life has benefited. But, the reason I still remember that story with this kid is because of how it changed me forever. This is why it's still so much there. I learned so much from that lesson, and I still learn it. Is it why? Because it's like, I know I was wrong. No question. I saw that boy so sad and broken because, and I acted like a monster. It's just, it was, and I felt so bad. So that has always stayed with me, and it should never leave. This is why, again, these are long sustained, activities and energies in our consciousness that teach us very valuable lessons. And so again, also being put to shame, again, people, but also people who are trying to shame you or trying to use shame or guilt against you, yes, you can't have it. It's like, look, if that's what you want to do, if you're thinking that this is going to work, it ain't working. I don't feel ashamed. And if that's the only way you can communicate is to try to make me feel bad and punish me and try to shame me and blame me for things, let's say that I didn't do, or accuse me, this whole kind of thing, then yeah, I can't have it. So in that context, it's absolutely true that you may be noticing, though, if you're noticing those kinds of things, but hopefully that's already been clear. But if those things show up, really introspect about where you're at. So anyway, I hope this was helpful, and I appreciate everyone's time and attention, and I appreciate everyone showing up here for this today.